Welcome to the Best and the Rest podcast, the show where I, Preston, review things. I'm just an average guy who hates his job and is trying to make his way out of it. In the podcast, I try to give the average person's perspective on pieces of media that people label the best, and I'll see them for myself. We're giving a rating belonging to the best or the rest. When I say the best, I don't mean that it's the number one of all time. There's no beating it. But I think it's more of a group that is, you could make an argument for it. If it doesn't fall into that category, I'll say that it belongs to the rest. So for a little piece of news here, I got on Twitter. I am on the Twitterverse. Going to be a great way for you to connect directly with me in my pocket. I can guarantee that if you tweeted me and I am at work, I will leave what I'm doing at work and respond to your tweet. How's that? That is devotion. That's a guarantee. What other podcast can promise that? That's why you tune in here for the material that no one else can give. You should follow me on Twitter, by the way, at TBATR Podcast, the Best and the Rest podcast. If you type in just the Best and the Rest podcast, I should pop up as well. You'll see right now that I'm playing through Ghost of Tsushima. That was originally supposed to be an episode for this, but between work and other commitments and how fucking long that game is, when it comes to doing all the side missions and stuff, I thought that this was a nice little easy episode that I could sneak in. I think it was for a show that has a lot of accolades, and there are a lot of people that says, and I think that there are a lot of people that say that this show is one of the best. So then therefore, I think it's worth it. On the bright side as well, my channel actually has views now. Count them, four total views on the channel, as well as 2 beautiful subscribers. That's a 50% conversion rate, right? YouTubers would kill for those kinds of numbers, but obviously I am on top of the game. I am obviously on my way to YouTube stardom, iTunes stardom, which, by the way, successfully submitted my request for getting this onto iTunes. We'll continue to update from there. It literally took me however many hours of just fucking researching how to do it and getting it set up. There are an endless amount of hoops, and it's almost as if they don't want podcasts. It is incredibly ill-conceived. So for this week, the piece that we're going to be looking at is something called A Silent Voice. It's something that was actually recommended to me by my sister. She doesn't know that I have the podcast. I've been keeping this pretty on the down low so far while I'm just kind of playing around and experimenting. But she really liked it. She knows I'm into Japanese culture, especially manga and anime. I have a pretty big list of things that I've read on there, and I hadn't heard of this before, so I thought it was a very good way just to jump in and kind of broaden my scope a little bit. I'll also transition that into, if you want me to review your show or game or whatever it is, including manga and anime, happy to read a series for you. Send the request to me by sending it to the Best and the Rest podcast at gmail.com, or tweet it at me at TBATR podcast. And I can guarantee you that if you message me now, while I am still trying to get people to listen to this, I will read or watch whatever you send me. That is a absolute guarantee. Also, please send some feedback my way. I'm new to this, trying to play around with things subject-wise, and especially how I'm structuring the videos from here on out. I think that it's going to continue to vary greatly. I think I already would redo the Avatar The Last Airbender one that I did, and the Last of Us Part 2 review that I did was getting closer to the mark, but still some improvements. This one I think is more or less the way that I'm going to go from here on out. But, it was a learning curve. I'm not going to beat myself up over it. So, quick summary on the show, or what is on the docket today. It is A Silent Voice. It's on Netflix. If you aren't familiar with it, it was very popular in Japan. It had a massive critical reception. I'd only heard of it recently, like I said, from my sister. It has a 94% on Rotten Tomatoes. It won the Best Animation of the Year in the 26th Japanese Movie Critics Awards, along with many other Best of awards. There was an absolute box office boom with it. It took over like 2 billion yen. upon release, it was number 2 in the Japanese box office. Like, people absolutely flocked to go and see this. I will say, just for clarification's sake, if you're listening to this and you are familiar with it, there is a manga that is also a bit deeper diving than the movie itself. I haven't read this. This is specifically just going to be about the movie. Like I said, it's on Netflix. Feel free to watch it. I'm going to give you a very quick, non-spoiler opinion. So that way, if you want to kind of hear what I have to say about it generally, or, if you think it's a good premise or whatever, and you want to go watch it, you can feel free to do so, and you can come right back. So in a very non-spoiler opinion, I think it's good. I think you should watch it. I am not going to give my actual rating of the best of the rest here. I'll save that for the very end. But the premise for this is, it's heavy. Oh, it's heavy. You smoke them if you got them, right? I would say that if you're not easily able to handle mental health issues, including suicide, depression, you might actually want to skip this one. That is your legitimate trigger warning if that is something that you are concerned with, right? Because this movie doesn't really hold back anything when it comes to that aspect of life and that reality that happens, right? It starts by traveling on with a boy named Shoya Ashida, a boy who's going over a lot of mental and emotional baggage over some of his past actions. It was basically centered around how he bullied a girl named Shoko Nishima, who was, by all means, legally deaf. She's not completely deaf, but for the purposes of this review, I'll just keep saying deaf. He bullied her in middle school. One day it eventually went too far. He gets reprimanded. They get into a fight. She eventually moves schools, and he has the fallout from his actions. People stop talking to him. People start picking on him, and he eventually becomes somewhat of a loner. And it gets really heavy really quick. Right now, like I said, I'm gonna not go into too many spoilers, but just know that there are a lot of things in this movie. Some things might throw you off, and some things might, really take you when it comes to like the heavy emotional topics. So like I said, deals with some heavy topics, but it keeps you interested with some of the characters that you're watching. I think that it is worth a watch. I don't think it's perfect. I do have some cons that I'll mention, but if you are looking for a show, you can do it. Just in general, I think the animation is really beautiful. One of the core points of the movie is that it uses sign language throughout, and it's like a Japanese version of sign language from what I can pick up. I know like 1 or 2 phrases in American Sign Language. I will not pretend that I'm fluent by any means. when it comes to American Sign Language. But to me, at least from the layman's perspective, it looks very legitimate. There's no just flashing around of hands. It is very deliberate. This word, this word, this word, this phrase. And the motions and the rhythms that you see when someone is actually signing through something is actually really cool. Like, you get this sense that it is somebody who is fluent in sign language, like Shoko, the main deaf girl. She obviously flies through sign language, and she's been doing it her whole life. Her little sister, Yuzuru, she does the same. But then there are people who aren't as familiar, like Shoya, the boy who was the bully and kind of our main character throughout. He is just learning, so he starts to struggle. He is, questioning what sign to use. You can tell it's very much of like a mental action. He's not fluent by any means. I thought it was just a really cool touch because you can kind of see the gears turning in his head when he talks. And I think it's one of those things that you can just really appreciate it from just a purely animation standpoint. You just sit there and go, wow. Like, they put a ton of work. Really, there's no cut corners when it comes to how the actual sign language is performed. You see the expressions on characters' faces. You feel that they were really making some painstaking efforts to show off joy, sadness, despair, hate. And, you can really feel all the characters' emotions when they are on screen. I don't think that there was anything that was over the top when it came to animation. It all seemed to be very much within the realm of what you'd expect. And I think that if you are purely just somebody who likes pretty animation, this is for you. I think the characters are really great as well. That's pretty much like the other major sticking point in the story for me. There are few small issues that I'll get to when we go into spoilers, things that I thought seemed a little bit off. But, they felt like real people in a sense. When they're kids, they're kind of shitheads, right? Because kids are. It's like the John Mulaney bit where it's like, I am terrified of a group of 13-year-olds on the other side of the street. I will walk to the other side. Same thing here, even though they're younger. And yeah, they're just shitty kids. And yeah, you go, I can't believe that we're falling around a kid who is super shitty. He seems like an awful person. Why are we messing around with this? But then you also have the aspect of later of, okay, yeah, he's very clearly grown since that point. And even though I hated him in the first part, even though I thought he was the most unlikable protagonist, here I am caring about his well-being in the second act. So I think that in the deeper moments, the characters really shine. I think the highs are really high. And I think that there are some lows that do drag the movie a little bit. For example, there were a few head-scratching moments with some characters. You're like, why would you possibly do that? There is no logic to that. I had that moment about twice where I was like, that doesn't make sense. And you kind of hand wave it. I think it's really important for me personally when a character is deep and has a couple deeper influences and motivations. If a character's just one note, you're like, God, just end it. What a boring drag. But that didn't happen here. And I think that most of the characters were thought out and had deeper moments, and those are the ones that shine, and those are the ones that get the main focus. I think there's one specific point that if you don't speak Japanese, you might be a little confused. I know I was. Like, I was sitting there for about 5 minutes going like, what? Wait, what just happened? And I know what you're thinking. Doesn't this have subtitles? It does have subtitles, but it actually adds to the confusion a little bit. Like I said, I will expand on that one in the spoiler section. But you see the correct subtitle for what a person said, and the other character reacts to what you, and another character reacts totally out of what you thought was said as a viewer. And since you're relying on subtitles, you're like, why are they talking about X? And it turns out that there was a misunderstanding, but it's not really clearly conveyed, right? And you, as somebody who's relying on the subtitles, were like, I didn't see any problem with that. And then you kind of come in as, okay, I guess that's what happened. Sure. I mean, it didn't seem to be a problem before, and I don't know why it was a problem now, and we don't see that same problem again with somebody misunderstanding someone, like in that context. And I know I'm being super vague right now, but just to stay away from spoilers, that's because it is a pretty big spoiler. You sit there and you're just more confused than you are sharing the emotion of the character, right? I also thought this movie was a little long. It's about 2.5 hours. So you just sit there and you're like, okay, come on. Let's kick it into gear. Let's get back in action. There are other people I want to see. There are other characters I want to explore. Let's get it moving, right? So that's kind of my general overview. Those are things that I would say are things to watch out for when you do decide to give it a go. Like I said, I watched it on Netflix, but I'm sure there are other sites that stream it as well. I think for legal purposes, I'll say that you should stay completely and totally for paid subscription services or purchasing it. But if any of that interested you, feel free to pause this, go watch it, and then come back and let me know what you think. So the spoilers are starting now. So like I said up above, this movie is about a really, really, really shitty kid that's super unlikable as your protagonist. I was sitting there in the first act going, is this the kid we want to deal with for the rest of this movie? And then, later on you see the character grow. You see that he's remorseful for his actions. And you go, okay, I'm a little bit more on board now. Like, if it was just the kid the entire movie, I wouldn't recommend it at all because the kid was just unbelievably unlikable. But, later on it kind of gets into the question of, am I worthy of being forgiven? Shoya, this main kid, because of the things that he's done, because he knows he treated Shoko, the deaf girl, in a really awful manner. These are the things that he deals with. That's why at the beginning of the movie, you see him attempt suicide, or he's about to jump off the bridge, but he is stopped, and he goes back and he has a really tough conversation with his mom about it, and it's a really impactful, emotional situation, and you know that if you've ever dealt with that kind of person before who does have mental issues and has thought about suicide or talked about suicide, that conversation that they have at the kitchen where she's basically making him promise not to try to commit suicide again is real. There's a lot of crying, there's a lot of yelling and screaming because people are still trying to process it, right? This movie did a very good job with that. I think that if you're looking at this movie, I think with the rest of this movie, like I said before, animation's really beautiful. I think there are a couple ways that things are presented in frames, and you really go, holy shit, that's beautiful. That's a really beautiful shot right there. You find yourself really watching the hands of the people who are actually signing, and, it didn't seem like there was a shortcut that was taken in conveying the proper signing aspect to this movie. I think that there are a couple choices that they made character-wise and animation-wise that kind of fused together really nicely. They blended together really nicely. For example, Shoya is alone. He is a loner. And he, in his mind, sees everyone with a big X over their face. And so you see whole crowds of people with X's, entire classrooms. He doesn't have a friend. And I thought it was just a really, really great way visually for us to get inside the character's mind. There's not a single friendly face that he sees at school. He is alone. But what's even better is that first moment when he starts to trust someone and open up to them, the X, peels off of their face, and he kind of opens himself up to this opportunity to be with somebody. And it works both character-wise and animation-wise to put you into that next mindset of, okay, he's opening up, right? It is made very clear to us as the audience, and it only helps to serve the character. So it's pretty much just like a 2-for-1 really great move in my mind. I think that it is a very good way to do it. But then, and it also goes on the flip side to even add more to it, where if somebody does betray him in his perspective, or if he feels like he can't open up to them, the X reappears on their face. It's a really fantastic visual tool. It is absolutely superb. I think that the characters in this are mostly really well written. I think that Shoya, Shoko, Tomohiro, Shoya's friend, Yuzuru, like I mentioned earlier, Shoko's little sister, and, I think they're great characters. I think that there are a few choices, like I said, that were kind of dumb character decisions for the sake of having a conflict, but I'll get into that when I get into the negatives. But for the most part, in a very large swath, characters are great. I also really appreciated that even though this dealt with very mature subjects, very deep and dark subjects, that it handled it really well. The issues of being deaf, the fact that kids who are under 10 are some of the worst people when it comes to bullying and peer pressure, and how they act even though it's wrong. When it comes to repercussions for your actions, when it comes to depression and suicide, these are all very heavy topics, but it was able to kind of keep the boat moving most of the time to take you into a realistic way of how these issues affect people. And I almost said real people, because even though they're not real, their actions and reactions were real to me when it came to those deeper issues. There's an issue of you want to move on from your past, but society won't let go of that image of you, specifically when it comes to Shoya, because people see him as a bully. People see that he did these awful things. And even though he doesn't want to go back to that place and he is remorseful for his actions, he can't get that monkey off of his back. I also think that, and this isn't like a very common review or anything like that, but I also think that the fact that this got animated in the first place, I think is actually really cool. I imagine the pitch for this was probably pretty hard, so I'm happy that they went for it. I can't imagine that, hey, this movie isn't about the deaf girl that you like and her issues with society. It's about this shithead kid who bullied her and his redemption. We're going to ramp up the animation budget by a gazillion by having accurate and detailed sign language throughout. I think that takes balls, and I'm glad that they went for it. And I think it was very well deserved on that side of things. I think that it's very cool that this went from concept to picture, and they pulled it off really well. Going into the negatives, I think there were a few things that stood out to me. And I mentioned them earlier, but I think that it's basically like three major things: character choices, the length, and some side characters that I feel could have been greatly improved. There's a girl named Ueno who, back in the day, when Shoya and her were friends, they used to bully Shoko. They meet again later in the movie after they've grown up, and while Shoya and other people are trying to accept Shoko, this girl Ueno still just bullies her and treats her like shit, and nobody else in the group is saying anything or doing anything, and they kind of just continue to let it happen. And even though it starts to ramp up to these crazy levels of why is she here, nobody seems to do anything or say anything. There's a part in the movie where Ueno and Shoko go off on their own. They go ride a Ferris wheel, right? Whatever. And Shoko's little sister like attaches a video camera to Shoko and doesn't tell her, but she turns it on. She turns it on so they can record the conversation. And later on, we get to watch the video, and Ueno's literally talking to Shoko. Again, they're grown up now, right? It's not just kids bullying each other anymore. Like, oh, I was mean when I was 10 years old. It's this girl who's, you know, they say middle school, and Japan's kind of weird with the way that their school system's set up, or rather, maybe not weird, but rather just different than how we do it here in the U.S. I fucking hate you. You took Shoya away from me. You drove us apart. I've always hated you. I'll always hate you, and blah, 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 blah. And, you know, just really fucking digs into her. And so you're like, oh my God, I can't believe it. Both Yuzuru and Shoya are like, oh my God, I can't believe she said that. Oh my God. You know, everybody's having like the right reaction to this with saying, you know, what the fuck, Ueno, that's not cool. But nobody tells her to her face. They kind of just let that happen. And then they keep bringing her around to things. You know, imagine yourself if you are in a real situation where you're in a friend group. Somebody is just loved by the friend group. There is, you know, John Doe, Jane Doe, whatever. John is just loved by the group. Everybody loves him. Everybody is always on his side. And he even has an issue with being hearing impaired, with being deaf. And you're like, oh my God, we have to do everything we can to help to make that person feel comfortable. And then there's another person in your group who just bullies them viciously. And you have evidence for how that person treats John or Jane Doe when nobody else is around. Just like total garbage. So you sit there and you go like, why is she still here? Why are you still inviting her? There is no reason for her to keep coming around. And, you know, and towards the end, she eventually does like she tries to learn sign language, and then everyone's like, oh my God, she's really trying. Oh, that's really great. But it's like, no. You never like apologized. You never did anything. Why the fuck are you here? You treat her like shit. Why would you possibly want them to keep tagging along with you? It just seemed really weird to me that nobody did anything after you get like this major character moment of, wow, she treats her like shit, but nobody does anything. Another character choice that I think gets fumbled across, and it kind of gets inflated too if you don't speak Japanese, and this is the scene that I was talking about earlier. There's a scene where Shoko tells Shoya that she loves him. She fucking screams it, right? You see the subtitles at the bottom of the screen saying, I love you. So you, as somebody who doesn't speak Japanese, assumes that it was said without issue, because, you know, I don't understand. They could have been saying anything, but the subtitles told me, I love you. So, okay, what's going to happen next? And then Shoya starts talking about how the moon is pretty. It totally takes a turn left when you're expecting straight. And you're like, what? Wait, you almost think you missed something, right? And it's because there's like a cultural gap. And I looked it up, and the word for love and the word for moon aren't like super similar. So even more so, you're kind of sitting there like, I must have missed something, right? But that's not really what happens. And then further on top of it, I think that Shoko hasn't had a problem earlier in the movie with people not understanding her when she does have to speak. You know, you kind of have she has the voice of a person who can't hear themselves, you know, so it is kind of that like muffled way that they talk. But it still seems like people understand what she's saying. And she also doesn't have that problem later on as well. So you're like, well, what just happened? Was this just like a one-time fluke? Like, was she nervous? What what was it? And, and quite a few minutes go by of you just being confused instead of getting answers. And eventually you do get the answer of, oh, well, she said it instead of signed it, and Shoya misunderstood her. But then they also never touch that again. They never go and talk about, hey, on the bridge there, when I said the moon and you started saying something else, what was that? Nobody ever brings this up. So it kind of goes on without resolution. There's this character thread that just kind of dangles at the end, and you don't really get closure on it. I think another point is that the length of the movie kind of drags. It could have been served a little bit better on some side characters and expanded on like why they were involved. For example, there's about 30 minutes that I think were like kind of totally cut out, and it's not exactly 30, it's around there, but I didn't feel like it had to be 2.5 hours long. I felt like it kind of dragged, a few scenes of dialogue where the point was made, but they're still talking, or plot points where you go, I kind of feel like this is just lengthening the movie. And for example, apparently in Japan, it's illegal to jump in public rivers, and Shoya does that and he gets suspended. Whatever, cultural thing, yada yada. But that leads him to meet Uzuru, and it goes from there. And you just go, okay, but we were kind of dicking around about this for him first jumping into the river, and then he gets shared at school, and then he gets called to the principal's office, and they ask him if it's real, and other people start asking him if it's real, and then he gets suspended, and then there's repercussions of him being suspended, yada yada yada. But and they use that as a way that while he's suspended, he went to go to the park, and that's where he meets Uzuru for the first time. But it's like, I don't know, could he have just met Uzuru while in the park later, non-related to that? It probably would have picked up the pace quite a bit. And I realize that there's a character point for Uzuru there, but it just seemed like there was just all this extra filler stuff where you're like, okay, I get it, he's suspended, let's move on, right? And that's just one example. It's not a perfect example, but it's an example, right? I much rather would have seen those 30 minutes be used towards something else, like giving the side characters any kind of motivation or personality. Right, there were two characters specifically that I'm thinking of. Miki, who is the class president, at least from what I could gather, and her friend Toshi. And you could just kind of wonder like why they're there. Shoya talks to Miki and says that her hair looks nice, or that he's wondering if she got it cut somewhere, whatever the exact line was. And her sticker of the X falls away. And so now she's down to meet Shoko after all these years. It just kind of seems like, why? Wait, why are you here again? Why do you care? Why are you about this? Like, and why was, if I ask somebody about their hair, I don't know if I like feel closer to them. I don't know if I've opened up to them by asking them a question. It just seemed kind of like that was the barrier? Huh? You know what I mean? And then there's this other guy, Toshi. He doesn't play like a major role again. He's a minor character. But I literally had to look up his name again. I was like, who was this guy? Like, I remembered that guy, redheaded guy or whatever. And you're like, why are you here? Are you just tagging along? And people are talking to him. People like him apparently in the group. And you're like, I still don't understand why you're here. Who are you? And so it just seemed like, if you take out the suspension scene, for example, and put it towards like why they're here and why they're involved, I think it could have served the movie a lot better. And it could have killed two birds with one stone with, maybe not making it seem like a drag in some parts, But for my ending thoughts, I think that it's a good movie. I think that it's really good in a few ways, but I think it needs a lot of work in other spots. There are a few really heavy subject matters, and I feel like those are really important to talk about. They need to be talked about, but you're kind of just waiting for these resolutions for those major plot points, and you get a little bogged down. I kind of found myself checking the time left on the movie halfway through, and then I went, oh my God, there's an hour and a half left. So it seems like you go, where can this possibly go? And it goes in some good places. Like I said, the highs are really great. Shoya saving Shoko from committing suicide, really great. Them finding each other afterwards, really great. Shoya at the very end, eventually learning to accept everyone. He starts crying. He can't stop crying. The X's on everyone falls to the ground. He opens himself up again. Really beautiful. Really, really beautiful stuff. Some really great high points. But I think that when there are these lower points, I feel like they're kind of just being chucked on the back of the high points. And it's like, and again, I don't hate the suspension scene. I'm just using it purely as an example. It's like, okay, suspension scene doesn't carry anything, but hey, there's a point where they meet each other after he wakes up out of a coma, and people won't remember that. And so you're like, well, why was it there in the first place? So that's just my opinion. You may feel free to disagree. Let me know if you agree or disagree. Those are my initial thoughts regarding the movie. As a reminder, just remember this is just an opinion, and we can all feel free to disagree with each other and still be civil. That's the review. And as a reminder, make sure to send the next request for next time's podcast at thebestandtherestpodcast@gmail.com, or you can follow me at Twitter at TBATRpodcast. If you follow me over there, you'll have a very good idea of what the next review will be if I don't get anything. But again, feel free to send something over. I would really look forward to interacting with you. So make sure to like and subscribe, share, help the channel grow. Peace out. And I'm thinking I got to start putting music tracks in for an outro or an intro. I'll learn how to do that next time. Thanks again. Take care.